The Halli Casser-Jayne Show airs Wednesdays, 3 p.m. Eastern. The podcast's always available online at HalliCasser-Jayne.com. Here's how you begin Radiant Angel. If I wanted to see assholes all day, I would have become a proctologist. Instead, I watch assholes for my country. No one writes a line like you, buddy. Nobody. You hear me? Absolutely nobody. So you got me to asking myself if the world has gone mad or if it's always been crazy and full of assholes. But these days, we're just more aware of it. What do you think?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. It's always been this way, number one. I know it's always been this way. We are more aware of it because of mass media, but I think we're less tolerant of it because we're at this point in the history of, of humanity and of civilization where we think things should be better. We made so many strides in communication and education and medicine. We think with all of this and sanitation, we have air conditioning, and things should be better, and we're just totally amazed that the world is still populated by assholes.
It is true. No one writes a line like thriller writer Nelson DeMille. Nobody. Hi, and welcome to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show. I am Halli Casser-Jayne. Thank you so much for tuning in. Today on the Halli Casser-Jayne Show, a conversation with Nelson DeMille, here to talk about his latest bestseller, Radiant Angel. #1. Yes, you heard me. #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. A close-up with Nelson DeMille when he joins me at my table. But first, the Halli Casser-Jayne Show is brought to you by Audible.com, a leading provider of spoken audio information and entertainment. Get a free audiobook and 30-day trial today by signing up at www.audibletrial.com/The Halli Casser-Jayne Show. And remember, the Halli Casser-Jayne Show is always available online at HalliCasser-Jayne.com and a host of venues including iHeartRadio, Stitcher.com, Spreaker.com, TuneIn Radio, iTunes, and Blog Talk Radio. Does Nelson DeMille really need an introduction? The former U.S. Army lieutenant who served in Vietnam is the author of 18 acclaimed novels, including the #1 New York Times bestsellers, Nightfall, PlumIsland, The Gatehouse, The Lion, and The Panther. His other New York Times bestsellers include The Charm School, Word of Honor, The Gold Coast, Spencerville, The Lion's Game, Upcountry, Wildfire, and The General's Daughter, the last of which was a major motion picture starring John Travolta. Gripping, fun, acerbic, and timely, Nelson DeMille's stories are always deceptively astute, and DeMille does it again with his latest thriller, Radiant Angel, in which he takes us into the heart of a new Cold War with a clock-ticking plot that has Manhattan in its crosshairs and the all-too-real threat of a newly resurgent Russia. John Corey is back, and like Nelson DeMille and good scotch, he only gets better with age. Let's talk. So, okay, Mr. DeMille, Radiant Angel, let me set this up. Your signature character, John Corey, has left the anti-terrorist task force and returned home to New York City, taking a job with the diplomatic surveillance group. His new assignment is to follow Russian diplomats working at the UN mission. Corey realizes something the U.S. government does not, the all-too-real threat of a newly resurgent Russia. Nelson, it appears that your trusty pencil is on the pulse of history here. Why do I think you didn't pick this subject just for fun?
Yeah, well, I started reading the book 2 years ago. I think at that point the Russians had not annexed the Crimea, and they weren't behind the invasion of the Ukraine. But you can see what was happening. I mean, even before that, I kind of started the book after the Sochi Olympics, and it looked like Russia was, okay place, but not really, and we knew that Putin was on the move, and I just thought this was a good subject, and as it turned out, it's now in the headlines again.
Yeah, and there's a whole lot in this book that's Really? Are we into a new Cold War?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the themes of the book. Are we into a new Cold War? Yes. The short answer is yes. Short answer is yes, because, mostly because of Putin. We've been ignoring the Russians since the collapse of the Soviet Union, and we've ignored them diplomatically and in other ways. They haven't reached out as much as we should have, and, they were kind of floundering for a while. It was, an empire that had fallen apart. And, of course, when that happens in history, there's always a strong man who comes to the surface, and this was Putin. And he's giving the people, the Russian people, their pride back. I give him credit for that. But on the other hand, he's causing mischief around the world.
He is certainly doing that. This is interesting to me. First of all, you always are on the pulse of history. I don't know if that is something that you think about or it just occurs, or that's just because I know you a little bit. You're into history and you're into what's happening in politics. So that maybe, I don't know, colors what it is that intrigues you. The idea, the actual seed, the germination of an idea to a writer, to me, is always fascinating. What was it? What specifically? Can you go back to a moment you went, I got an idea for a book?
Well, some books I can, and I was a political science history major, so I'm kind of a news junkie, and that colors my books. And I write what they call the geopolitical thriller, whatever that is. It sounds good, It sounds really.
I think that's great. It's perfect. Yeah.
Geopolitical thriller. It was really, I think, the Olympics in Sochi that started getting me thinking about Russia, and I was thinking about something set, there, and but it was that plus what was going on in the news. And the other fact was, sometimes it's what you don't want to do. And, 5 of my John Corey books had to do with Islamic terrorism, and I was quite frankly getting a little tired of it, and I had the feeling the readers were getting tired of it, so I needed John, my headline character, to come up with something to do. And I was thinking about, the Chinese and anything other than Islamic radicalism or Islamic terrorism, but I came up with the idea that John should be assigned to the diplomatic security group to watch the Russians, and that's where the idea came from.
Yeah, it's very funny. Everything old is new again, isn't it? I mean, yeah. Russia's sexy. Your book is sexy. You're sexy. I mean, the book is sexy. No, you're welcome. But I mean, in the sense that it is, you're right. This Islamic terrorism thing is getting a little bit, worn. If I watch one more movie with it, by the way, I'm going to throw up from it. But this is like maybe it's our generation. Maybe we're going back to something that titillates something in our core. I'm not sure. Radiant Angel. For those who don't know what you mean by Radiant Angel, tell us what Radiant Angel is.
Yeah, I should explain that. It's not a spiritual book. I can assure you, it's not a spiritual book. It's just a code word. It's kind of an open code. It's not a secret code word, but it's a code word the FBI and other intelligence or other security groups use for a nuclear detection operation. So that if you're doing like a sweep with radiation detectors in an area, it's called a Radiant Angel operation. So that's where that comes from. And the original title of the book was different.
What was it?
But it was a quiet end, because the job that John Corey has now with the diplomatic surveillance group is considered a quiet end or a dead end. He got kind of demoted, and but John is not going to take the demotion lying down. So the FBI says, when you get put out to pasture like this, and you're just surveilling diplomats at the UN in Manhattan, you're doing what they call quiet end work. But that was the name of the book, and the publisher liked Radiant Angel instead, so they don't argue.
Which do you like better?
Well, I like A Quiet End myself. And in fact, in the UK, if anybody goes online and looking for the book, either as an e-book or and they might get confused on Amazon because in the UK, the book is called A Quiet End. They like that title. They like my title, so they called it A Quiet End. So
I love when books have different titles in different countries. It makes life crazy for you guys, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I agree. I get that. So listen, talk to me. John Corey. Oh, my God. Nelson, the delicious John Corey. I really. He is truly one of my personal favorite characters ever. But, I detected a new side of him in Radiant Angel. Wistful, perhaps? And let me tell you what I said, because you didn't hear the intro. I said in the intro that your books are like a good scotch, which you drink.
Okay,
they get better with age. They do. They get better with age. And John Corey takes on a new dimension. So I want to ask you this, Mr. Nelson Richard DeMille. Is that really your middle name?
Richard, yes, it is. Very
Love
good.
that. I had a husband once. His name was Richard. As you move into your, you know me. Here I go. Right. As you move into your 70s, how's the view changed through the eyes of septuagenarian, and how you write?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. You know, my characters can't be my age, and nobody would really care about them. And it's a problem with series characters. They get older, and but you don't want them to get older, so you kind of try to freeze time. But you're right. In this book, John, I get a lot of feedback from my fans, and some of the feedback said John Corey is a little bit over the top, a little bit more than they. So I toned him down a little bit in terms of his sarcasm and his New York cynicism. But he's still John Corey, and also he's having marital difficulties in this book, and that kind of toned him down a little bit. And his wife, Kate, who's special agent, FBI special agent, is not in this book. She's off camera. She's in Washington on business. So he's kind of alone with a new young trainee partner named Tess Faraday, who's, of course, good-looking, and they're in the car together, surveilling the Russians. So, we see a different change, and it's also, it's a product of age for sure. His age, not mine, but...
Nothing changes with Nelson DeMille and his age. I know that personally.
He's more mature, right? You said wistful, but also you would say, I'm sure, mature. He's got a little bit more mature. He's not as crazy as he was in the last couple of books.
Yeah, that would work. You brought it up. There are 3 women in this book, off camera, right. On camera, if you will. Tess and Beth Penrose comes back. But what's the deal with you? 3 together fit your every ideal? Is this Corey's harem or Nelson's harem?
Yeah, Corey runs across an old girlfriend in this book too, Beth Penrose from the first John Corey book, which was Plum Island, and she was a good character. Everybody liked her. But she's not been in any of the other Corey books. But I broke up with her, and he married Kate Mayfield, who was FBI special agent. But he's out on the end of Long Island, and a lot of this book is set in the Hamptons and Southampton, and she's a county detective out there. So it was a good opportunity to bring her back, and he sees her, and while during the course of the investigation, and he's kind of ambivalent about, as we all are when we see old boyfriends and girlfriends, but. They don't begin well, but then they kind of, remember the better times. So I might bring them back again, too. A lot of people like her.
Yeah, for sure. But you're not going to take my bite on my Corey or DeMille harem?
Well,
why not?
Well, thank God I can write scenes that I might not live myself, but that's my ultimate fantasy.
Yes. The luscious life of a writer in their brain. It's so wonderful, right? So we bring up women, and I've said this to you before on air. I've said that I think that you do women characters as well as you do men characters, even better maybe in some ways. And I always find that interesting when men writers can do that. So I want to understand why you do women so well. Because does any man understand women? Does John Corey understand women?
No, he doesn't, and he always says he doesn't. But of course, with the advantage of years of dealing with the opposite sex, you're going to understand. It's the most, and I think I mentioned this to you once. It's one of the toughest things a writer has to do. You have to create. Women writers have trouble with male characters, especially the dialogue or how they perceive they might act, and men have the same problem with female characters. Of all the things you do, you can create ethnic groups sometimes in different age groups and different socioeconomic groups, and you really have to create these characters so they sound and act as though they're in that group. But when it comes to the gender thing, it's the biggest challenge, I think. But somehow I got it. Well, and it helps too that my assistant is female, and and my editor is female, so that's a good thing. And if I'm going wrong someplace, they'll let me know.
Have they caught you going wrong?
Yeah, a couple of times. They said she would be more emotional here, or meaning the character, she might cry here. One woman, but I also get it from some of my fans. They say, John never touches her. He doesn't really take her hand, and and so so I had to put a scene in that. John took Kate's hand, and whatever. I listen. At least I listen. Most guys don't even listen. I at least listen.
Well, that comes with age, I'm sure. You learned there's no point in not listening. You are listening to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show, the podcast always available online at HalliCasser-Jayne.com. Today we're speaking with Nelson DeMille, author of the #1 New York Times bestseller, Radiant Angel. Let's go back to Russia for a second and the reset. I can't have you here and not talk politics because you and I, we love this game. Talk to me about this President Obama. Putin is just taunting him in every way that he possibly can, and this guy is just like, no big deal, I don't quite get it. And he's playing the same, with some other places. People give him the one finger and he just kind of like shines it on. What are your thoughts? Why is he writing?
I think it's not political on his part, because he's right. He does this to other world leaders, and it's more. I think it's it's a character flaw, and he's a weak man. Okay, he's a weak man. He has a temper, but like a lot of weak people, he gets his temper up now and then. But basically, he's weak, and he doesn't seem to have that that attitude that he's leading the strongest country in the world. I mean, he started off with an apology tour, bowing to the Saudi king and all that. I mean, you don't do that, and he projects weakness, and that's the problem. And
what's so funny about
weakness.
Yeah, and then he projects this weakness, and yet at the other hand, he the people around him don't stand up to him.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing. Politically, he's this is where he gets his back up about politics, and he has an incredible contempt of Congress. But and congressmen have told me this. The thing about projecting weakness is that in a dangerous world like this, you get people like Putin and people in North Korea and Iran, certainly. They're going to take advantage of it. They see weakness, they smell it, they know it. And he, on the world stage, is considered, a Lilliputian, really. Domestically, he's a little bit more of an infighter, but he's picking the wrong fights, and he has no allies anymore. The Congress, even the Democrats, do not like him. Believe me, I've heard this from more than one congressman, and he's got a few true believers still left. He's certainly around him, and maybe a few left in Congress. But if you think about what if you're a Democratic congressman, you've been, you lost control of the House, you lost control of the Senate. He's been a total disaster for the Democratic Party. And so if anything, the Republicans should like him. They should say he's a great president.
Yeah, exactly. You're boosting our position here. But staying on Russians, I mentioned Putin. Let's go back to Russia for a second, because I want to ask you about writing these characters. I've always thought that Russians, like Nazis, are very too often portrayed as caricatures of themselves. I call it the Achtung depiction. I've mentioned this to other writers.
Yeah.
How hard is it not to fall into that trap when you're creating your Russian bad guys? Or let me ask you this. Have Russians actually become caricatures of themselves?
Well, maybe. That's a good question. To some extent. And that's a problem, too. You're trying to create a villain. My villain here is Colonel Petrov. He is an SVR colonel, intelligence colonel, but SVR is the successor to the KGB. And I've been to Russia twice, and I kind of like the Russian people. Actually, they're more like us than we realize, and they like to drink, and they're good-natured, basically. And so, I always thought they would be a natural ally if we hadn't bungled the relationship with them over the last 10 years. They get the same problems we do with Islamic terrorism and with China, and they are, they want to be a Western country, but we haven't taken advantage of that. So I think, the more we get to know them, it was going well there for a while in the 90s. When we never considered them the enemy after the Cold War was over, but now, of course, they're the enemy. But now you have to kind of portray this villain, and as a writer, you say, well, I did some Cold War books. I knew how I knew the Russians were villainous because they were commies. That was easy, and they were true believers in communism. Now they're not communists. I don't know what they believe in. I don't know how to make them really villainous. And I think I portrayed this guy Petrov, in a not a sympathetic way, but you kind of understand where he's coming from. He wasn't a caricature. He really loved his country, and he wanted Russia to be a dominant, force. But he was also crazy at the same time.
Yeah, I thought you did a really good job on him. That's why I'm asking the question. I thought that he was very dimensional. He wasn't just your run-of-the-mill Russian thug.
The other Russians in the book are 12 hookers. How did I do with the 12 hookers?
You did great.
They came off pretty well, I think. Right?
You did just fine. But again, we're getting back to, I think, what is your expertise? Women in any role that they take. Go figure. So let's stay in politics for a second. Who are more dangerous? Talk to me. Iranians, Islamist extremists, Russians? Who do you think we should be most worried about?
The Russians are much more dangerous, potentially. I mean, the Islamic extremists and the Chinese are, a long-range danger too. But the Russians, the Soviet Union was a nuclear power, and now the Russian Federation is the same nuclear power. They have thousands of thermonuclear warheads. They have a nuclear submarine fleet that's second only to the American fleet. And this is a huge landmass of 200 million people. I mean, just step back and be objective, and you say, this country could conquer the world under the right circumstances. Well, you can't say that about, Islam or China today or Iran. These are regional powers, and it may change in the years to come. But right now, the second most powerful country in the world is the Russian Federation, the old Soviet Union. And if we, wind up in another Cold War like this, it would be a lot more damaging, I think, to us than anything else that's going on in the world at the moment.
Yeah, I agree with you.
That's the thing that's hard to get people to understand or to believe. People still, of course, going to focus on Islamic terrorism and the threat of China and Iran, and it's all legitimate. They're all legitimate concerns, but these are down-the-road concerns to a large extent. Russia is now the second biggest thermonuclear power on the planet, and we need to talk to them and hopefully get them on our side. It would be a great alliance, Russian-American alliance with the Eastern Europe. We here are just not paying attention, but if you go to Europe, and I was in Europe last summer, and if you go to Poland and any Eastern European country, they are very concerned because they're there. We're here, they're there, so they get it, but we still don't get it. And I think maybe one of the things I try to bring out in Radiant Angel is that we're a little bit asleep at the wheel.
I think you make a very good point of that, which is why I keep going in this conversation back to Russia and the importance of of acknowledging what is exactly going on and that we are not paying attention where we need to be paying attention. DeMille trivia. Is this true? You found a letter on the body of a North Vietnamese soldier in 1968 when you were over there?
Yes, yeah.
That is true. I never heard that story before.
And that's why that was kind of one of the things that got me to write Upcountry. He was dead. He didn't need the letter anymore for sure, and I had it for years. And I finally got it translated. It was a letter from his girlfriend. It was funny. It's kind of funny. It's not funny that he was dead, but it was her telling him not to believe the rumors that he's been hearing about her back in North Vietnam. So it was, your typical letter that I'm sure millions of women have written to millions of men, in war. But I thought it would be a good catalyst for a book about returning to Vietnam, which is what I did. I was there in '68, then I went back in '97. So and I got the letter translated by the Vietnam Veterans of America, the VVA, who have a program of American soldiers. It's kind of an interesting program. American soldiers taking all these war trophies that they've gathered, over the years from during the war, and returning them to give them to the VVA, and the VVA trying to find the families of the dead soldiers. So I gave the actual physical letter. I made a copy of it. I gave the physical letter to the VVA, and they indeed, first of all, I had it translated, and they found the family of the dead soldier.
Isn't that amazing?
So,
I love that story.
It's amazing. It's a great program, but very hard to find these families after all these years, and a lot of the war trophies, had no identification on them. So, but I'm sure some families, some places comforted, but
It's a nice little bit of trivia to know about you.
Yeah.
You get pretty darn graphic in Radiant Angel. It seems that these days both violence and sex are often portrayed to what some call the extreme. you worry that we'll become immune to violence if it's continued to be portrayed out there the way that it is? Or maybe, listen to me, Nelson, it's not extreme. You're actually portraying how things are today.
Yeah, to some extent that's true. In this particular, a lot of my books don't have a lot of violence. And
this one I thought was more than normal.
Yeah, it was because of the plot. The plot called for a lot of people getting whacked, and you try to keep the body count down if you can. And an old editor told me years and years ago, when you're writing about one murder is a tragedy. Multiple murders are a sanitation problem. So you got to keep that in mind, and that murder's got to be, it's got to have some weight, and it's got to be, not a mass kind of thing. But in this book, because of the plot, there was really no other way around it. And, but when you do it on, paper, it doesn't justify a lot of graphic sexual violence, but it is, on paper as opposed to the movies, where this stuff is really graphic with blood splattering and arms flying.
It's everywhere. Oh my God.
All over the place,
Right.
This is a little bit more, and in fiction it's a little bit more palatable.
But it's going to get to the screen. It's going to get to the TV screen. Is that a rumor or is that true? All of these books,
it's possible.
or at least one.
The whole Corey series is being looked at as, for Cablevision, AMC and HBO are both interested, and I believe also TNT. The rights are owned by Sony, Sony TV, who was looking for a TV network, a cable network to co-produce. So that would be great if we could do that.
How close are we to this?
We were very close for a while, but, it's just this negotiations. I don't, my agents call me and they give me a briefing, and I say, okay, fine. I don't like to get involved with Hollywood. I have enough to get involved with my publisher and sales and everything else. And Hollywood is kind of like, when it happens, it's great, like it did with General's Daughter, with John Travolta. But when it doesn't happen, it's more likely not to happen. So I'm not taking it to the bank. I'm not. I
am. I know that they're going to buy it. They have to, because they'd be foolish if they didn't. This is one of the great characters of all time, and you know who I think should play John Corey, because it's way off the radar. It's not who you think. But I think Mark Ruffalo would be perfect.
Oh, somebody mentioned that to me years ago, but the guy who was interested was Aaron Eckhart once, and he's a good actor.
Yeah, I don't see it. He doesn't have a thing.
No, he doesn't have that kind of gravitas, right?
Yeah, he doesn't. There's this. Well, I'm going to describe Corey as this. He's raw. He's a little rough around the edges. He's sardonic. He's sexy. He's got walls as thick as kryptonite. A tad emotionally unavailable. He's alluring to most women on the face of it, and an image idealized by men. So, how tough is John Corey to live with as his writer, and how tough is it to live with Nelson DeMille, who is a part of John Corey?
Well, maybe that is my alter ego. I don't know, but the character just came out of my head. Obviously, yes, there's got to be some of me. Otherwise, where would it come from? When I sat down about 15 years ago to write a standalone novel, I didn't think this was going to be a series, and that was Plum Island. I just wanted to create this kind of man's man, but someone who not only women like, but that men like too. Men like him as a man's man. Women like him because he takes care of business and he gets things done. And he's, he's not sensitive by any means, but he's certainly, charming with women when he needs to be charming. And so I think both sexes like him. But where did he come from? Somewhere buried deep in my subconscious, this guy was living there. And but obviously it's partly me too. And people say yes. People say there's more in him than you realize, Nelson. So,
well, I as I've gotten to know you a little bit, definitely he's in you. Are you kidding? I mean, it's like one and the same. But are you? I would imagine that he'd be very tough to live with, i.e., why he goes from woman to woman. And you've had a couple of marriages. Are you tough to live with? You can tell us.
Well, yeah. I should ask my first two wives. I'll tell you yes, and others, look, it's not easy living with anybody and of the opposite sex, right? We've all been there, and
Don't ask me to.
Writers are hard to live with, and I'm not the only one who'll tell you that. And every writer's wife will tell you, every writer's girlfriend, and probably all artists, I think. Anybody in the creative field are temperamental, moody. We all are. You have bad days, you have good days, things are not going well, and, some women who get it, they understand, what you're going through, and we all have tough jobs. You go to the office, you come home, but you can usually put it behind you. When you're in this game, and by the nature of the game, you're self-employed, so you've got to make a living every day, and the creative forces have to be there. You can't fake it any day. You can I used to work in an office. I could go to the office with a hangover and fake it, and nobody knew. But when you're writing and you got to produce, there's nothing you can fake. It's got to be real, and when it's not going well, you become frustrated, and sometimes, yes, you become difficult to live with.
I'm going to ask you a crazy question. Did you read 50 Shades of Grey?
No, I did not. No.
Okay. No, well, there's a room in 50 Shades of Grey. You know the story, I'm sure, a little bit. It's the red room,
yes.
Right? And in that red room in 50 Shades of Grey, it's what he calls his playroom. It's also a torture room. So I understand you do your writing in a red room, and I want to know if writing for you is playtime, torture time, or a little bit of both?
Well, it's mostly torture, to be quite honest. It is, there's a saying in the business, I hate writing, but I love having written. And sometimes on a good day, you had a good day, it's good. When the book is finished, it's a really good time. But, to me, I take it seriously, and it's torturous. But there are other writers who tell me, I had fun today writing, and invariably, people tell me that, other writers that I know are not very good writers. They don't get what it means to really, really dig in and do the thing right. If they're having fun because it's easy, then they are not doing. There's nothing easy about it. There are geniuses out there, I'm sure, who can make it seem easy. Stephen King being one. But most of us, are not happy doing what we're doing. And we wish we could do something else, but as Robert Benchley once said, he says, I'd love to quit this job, but I'd love to quit writing, but I'm too rich and famous to quit.
Oh, God.
That's where it's at for a lot of bestsellers.
I would kill you. Do you hear me? I would kill you, because you are my favorite writer, but don't tell anybody. Listen to me. Humor, sarcasm, irony, mockery, derision, disdain, scorn, cynicism. Where does that come from? You do it better than anybody.
Oh, well, thanks. I think probably just being a New Yorker. I don't know. I lived here all my life.
No, it's got to be more than that, because there's an art to cynicism. There really is.
Well, New Yorkers are cynical. I don't know. Maybe partly the Italian heritage. Italians are thought to be jolly, but they're very cynical about life, and maybe ironic is more like it, and that's part of my heritage. And I think really growing up in New York around a lot of people who are New Yorkers are cynics, and they're also sarcastic, and they have a lot of dark humor because, and that I learned in the Army. When things are really going badly, and then when I was in combat in Vietnam, somebody invariably cracked a joke, and that's really like dark GI humor, gallows humor, and that was kind of an Army thing that I took away with me, that when things are real, and I see the same thing with the NYPD, and so I think, I try to bring that out in the Corey character, but also in some of my other characters. The humor is good in the book. It keeps the reader engaged, I believe. It
keeps people laughing, like me, hysterically laughing. Okay. So here's how you begin Radiant Angel. If I wanted to see assholes all day, I would have become a proctologist. Instead, I watch assholes for my country. No one writes a line like you, buddy. Nobody. You hear me? Absolutely nobody. So you've got me to asking myself if the world has gone mad, or if it's always been crazy and full of assholes, but these days we're just more aware of it. What do you think?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. It's always been this way, number one. I know it's always been this way. We are more aware of it because of mass media, but I think we're less tolerant of it because we're at this point in the history of, of humanity and of civilization where we think things should be better. we made so many strides in communication and education and medicine. We think with all of this and sanitation, we have air conditioning, and things should be better, and we're just totally amazed that the world is still populated by assholes, and things are still not going well. And I think we are, disappointed, and that's what makes us angry. I think people accepted this years ago. If you lived in another period, with plagues and deaths and wars and destruction and famine that you had no control over, you accepted it as God's will, and that's what people did. But now we say we can control these things, and yet they're still going wrong. So what happened? And that's the question of the moment. Why are we not happier with all that we've accomplished as a civilization, and why is everything still going wrong? And when we find out, we'll have the answer.
Right. One last question. Do you ever just want to blow John Corey up? Tell me the truth.
Well, one gets tired of one's character for sure, and that's why I kind of gave him another job and changed his persona a little bit. There are times, but you should never kill the guy who pays the rent, and he pays the rent for me. So and every guy who writes, every woman too who writes a serious character, knows that you don't kill him off the way Conan Doyle killed off Sherlock Holmes. Then he had to bring him back from the dead, basically. You just have them either disappear or do something, because eventually they're going to come back when you need them back. So this is the last John Corey for a while. I'm working on a different book at the moment, but this one will be out for it'll be a year in hardcover, a year in paperback, and I'm doing something else, and then the one after one will be another John Corey.
Okay, well, I'm glad that you're not blowing him up. Mr. DeMille, thank you for allowing us this close-up. I've been speaking with author Nelson DeMille about his latest thriller, New York Times #1 bestseller, Radiant Angel, by way of Grand Central Publishing. For more about Mr. DeMille and his work, visit his website at nelsondemille.net, on Facebook as Nelson DeMille Author, and on Twitter, where his handle is Nelson DeMille. Before I go, I want to remind everyone that podcasts of current and past shows are always available to listen to free on iTunes under The Halli Casser-Jayne Show. The Halli Casser-Jayne Show is also available for download via Spreaker.com, Stitcher.com, BlogTalkRadio.com, and a host of other venues. Google The Halli Casser-Jayne Show, and you will find us. Of course, podcasts of our shows, both past and present, are always posted for your listening pleasure at HalliCasser-Jayne.com, which I hope you'll visit often for the latest information on our upcoming segments. I'll be back next week, same time, 3 p.m. Eastern, for another edition of the Halli Casser-Jayne Show, brought to you by Audible.com. Get a free audiobook download at www.audibletrial.com/The Halli Casser-Jayne Show. Audible.com features over 100,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. Stay in touch, won't you? Remember, that's HalliCasserJayne.com. Discover us on Facebook at Halli Casser-Jayne and on Twitter at HalliCJ. I love to hear from you. So, till we meet again, this is Halli Casser-Jayne. It's a wrap. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show, a production of RESEC LLC. Associate producer, Suzanne Probst. Music by Tony Rosales Jazz. Visit HalliCasserJayne.com.